Thank you for joining us today, Mr. Kimmell.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on.
So, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your family?
Sure. Not originally from Evansville, but have lived here over 25 years. Married to a wonderful wife, Mary, and we have 5 kids and 9 grandchildren. So, quite a family.
So, how did you get started with WNIN?
That leads into a long story, actually. But I went to Murray State University and studied radio and television management and production, and have been fortunate enough to work in the field I studied since then. And that was back in the early 80s. But worked in commercial television, worked in public television in my 20s. Ended up in the early 90s going out on my own and starting my own production company and doing cable programming for national cable networks. And did that for almost 20 years. And then decided to try and start a cable television network called Garage Television, which was a pretty ambitious project. Ended up doing that for a couple of years, couldn't quite raise the money needed to start that network. And about that time I heard that David Dial, who was the president and general manager of WNIN, was retiring. And I thought, gee, you know, I'm flying all over the country, getting a little bit tired of that. If there was something for me in Evansville, this would be the job. And I'm glad that I applied for the position and that the community entrusted me with the station.
Can you tell us a little bit about your own production company that you had?
Well, in 1994, I started a company called Bradley David Productions. And Bradley David Productions, I started out of Evansville. And you know, in the early 90s, technology was just getting to the point where you could actually do that out of Evansville. You know, you could start communicating with cable networks, and there were cable television was still expanding. The late 80s and early 90s, cable television just exploded as far as programming, number of channels, all that stuff. So it was a great time to get involved. But yes, I had the company here. It's still Mad Stash, which was Bradley David Productions, is still on the north side of Evansville today, some almost 25 years later. That company came about because of an idea I had for a show called My Classic Car, which was about classic cars, obviously. And was fortunate enough to get that on what used to be TNN cable network. It's now called Spike. But had that show on the air for many, many years on TNN. Then it went to the Speed Channel and so on and so forth. But that's what that company did. And I was the head of that company for about 20 years. When I sold out to my partner, Dennis Gage, who is the host of My Classic Car, about a year after I sold to him, he changed the name of it to Mad Stash because he has a big handlebar mustache. So it still exists, it's just under a different name now.
Back in '95, Brad had a concept for a show called My Classic Car, and he couldn't find a host. And I had a really good day job. I wasn't really looking for a TV job over at Bristol Myers Squibb as a product development director. But we got together, both of us had a love of cars, launched this show. I thought it'd just be kind of a fun thing to do on the side. It turned out to be much more than that. And Brad and I think, worked real hard. Definitely the first few years to get this thing kicked off. We traveled all over the country. We both acted like we knew what we were doing, and we only did so much. But we made it up as we went along, and the show is still going now, 21 seasons going strong, and it's still a lot of fun. Brad and I mean, you go back to those early days, it was real different than it is now, but I don't think I'd trade it.
So I'm sure before you came to WNIN, you had some pretty interesting stories.
Oh yeah. The great thing about you know, doing My Classic Car was to travel and meet people. Of course, I was a car fanatic on top of it, so I was in the television business and was able to marry 2 of my loves together and do it for a living, which is not something everybody gets to do in life. So I really enjoyed that. But yeah, part of it was traveling around meeting people that own cars. And there are a few people in the country that are bigger car fanatics than Jay Leno. Dennis and I would go out and once a year, and we would visit his garage. And he has it's about the size of a Kmart, if you can imagine that, or a Walmart inside. And he has about 200 cars and motorcycles in there. And he would grab something, an old fire truck, an old whatever, and we would just, do a story on that with him. And he was such a genuine person. And he's very laid back, and he likes to have fun. But yeah, there are many, many times that we would get on some excursion with him or be driving down the 5 freeway in Los Angeles on top of a fire truck, 1938 fire truck, but it's always a fun time.
So have you always worked in television, in the television medium, or have you ever dabbled in film or other types of media?
One time I did have the opportunity about 10 years ago to produce an independent film called Novum, N-O-V-E-M, which is Latin for 9. But it was a story of 9 college students who in 1973 got together and produced some music together at a remote studio location, just not as a band, but just as friends. And tragically, they were killed on the way back from that session, and their recordings disappeared and were discovered by modern-day college students. It's kind of the journey of discovering who these kids were back in 1973. And anyway, that was an independent film that I produced, and it did quite well on the film festival circuit and had a short theatrical run in the United States and Japan and Canada. And so I guess when I talked to you about at the beginning how I really wanted to be a director, that was my chance to dabble in directing for a while.
So as the current president of WNIN, what are some of the responsibilities that you hold specifically?
One of the things I spend a lot of time on is trying to figure out fundraising, because we are a nonprofit, and that means that we don't sell commercial time like other stations do, commercial stations do. So we rely on donations. Majority of our funding comes from the community directly. We do get some state and some federal funding, but the majority of our funding comes right out of the Evansville area. And so that's a constant need for us, is to get out and engage the community and show them why it's important to fund WNIN. And then the other things that I do is, with my background, obviously I'm heavily involved in content production. So what type of television programming are we doing? What type of radio programming are we doing? And now we're getting more into the digital side of it, everything from social media to websites and that type of thing. And then there's the fundraising aspect from working with local legislators to make sure they understand why state funding is important to us. And then there's a community engagement piece of it, speaking in front of the Rotary Club or different organizations and really letting people know why it's important to support WNIN. So there are other things, but I won't bore you with the entire list. But those are probably 3 of the biggest things that I do.
So what do you think the future holds for WNIN?
So that's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity for us. So where do I see us going? I think you're going to see public media specifically really start to engage the audiences in new ways. We will start doing, and are already starting to do things where we want a 2-way dialogue now. We don't want to just push things out for people to watch. We want to have community conversations. So you're going to see us host a lot more things where we have maybe a live studio broadcast associated after we show a documentary or something, where the public can actually come in and interact with that, or tweet in a question and things like that. You're also going to see us get more into smaller, what I call podcasting. In other words, smaller little programs that are put out even over social media and things like that. So the content is king for us. And in the media business, content is king. That's the term. And as you guys know, anything that you produce, you're after trying to pick subjects that people are interested in, right? What do they want to see? What story could we do that people are interested in? That's not going to change. What's changing is the way people interact with media and what platform it's going out and how they're getting it. And that's where the big challenge is for us. But I also see it as a great opportunity for WNIN.
I think it'd be something interesting to see, like after showing a documentary, having like live podcasts. Mm-hmm. And tweeting in questions to interact with you guys about it?
Exactly. Exactly. So if we had something that you were interested in, I don't know what that would be, but I'd be all ears. Yeah, we could produce some programming related to that subject and then like you said, either it could be tweets or it could be something that you could watch, on your tablet or smartphone and interact with, right? And I think that's where it's all going. We're all becoming one technical community. We're all linked by technology.
If you had one piece of advice for anybody who wanted to go into broadcasting or television production, what would that be?
When people ask me that question, I say first pick something that you have a passion for, and don't be afraid to take chances. That's probably the second part of it. When I started Bradley David Productions in the early 90s, I worked at a local television station and, had done well, but I had to take a chance. I mean, I had to kind of take my life savings and start a company as an entrepreneur. That was a big step. But at the time, and kind of the way I run my entire life, I kind of think of, when I look at the opportunity of doing it, I say, what's the worst thing that can happen to me? And if I'm okay with that as a possible outcome, then I say, why not do it? If you think of the worst thing that can happen to you and you say, you know what, if I give it 110% and that's what happens, I'm okay with it, then you should be doing it. That's my philosophy.
Thank you for taking time out of your day to speak with us.
Yeah, well, I enjoyed it. Thanks for asking me.
Reporting from WNIN Studios in Evansville, Indiana, for Bosse's EVSC Community Link, I'm Kivante Turnley.